Hey everyone, Keto Comet. Welcome to Sunday, Bloody Sunday. We've got a great case for you today. This is one that kind of haunted me as a child when I first saw the 1984 made-for-TV movie called Fatal Vision, based on a book written by a man that interviewed the perpetrator of these crimes extensively. Uh, Before Chris Watts, there was Jeffrey MacDonald, and today we're going to get into part one of this saga that is still stretching over about 40 years. This one is going to be one of the more graphic ones that I do because I'm going to talk extensively about the crime scene. So just be warned about that. I'm going to have to break this into several parts, definitely two, maybe more. But today we're going to get into part one and explore Jeffrey MacDonald. Let's get into it. Jeffrey MacDonald was born October 12, 1943, in Jamaica, Queens, New York. He was the fourth son of Robert and Dorothy MacDonald. When he was a child, they moved to Patachoke, Long Island, which is a small little blue-collar village on the south side of Long Island, where he attended the local high school and was, by all accounts, one of the more popular kids at the school, voted most likely to succeed, class president, captain of the football team, you name it. In addition, he excelled at academics. As a child and early in preteen, he worked extensively delivering papers, was a well-behaved child by all accounts, but always very driven. Definitely the stereotypical A-type personality. He wanted things perfect, he wanted things his way, and that went on to serve him well in later life by making him a straight A student and a valedictorian of his high school class. Colette Stevenson was Jeffrey's high school sweetheart. She was born May 10th, 1944, to Edith and Edward Stevenson, also of Long Island in Suffolk County, which is the area in which their tiny little village was located. She had a very typical middle class, working class upbringing. The backstory to her family is one that's kind of sad. Edward Stevenson always suffered from depression and had other mental issues going on, while his wife Edith had suffered three miscarriages prior to the birth of Colette. Each one had been a girl, and each time she had wanted to name the little girl Colette. She had miscarriages and stillbirths three separate occasions before Colette was finally born, as the fourth Colette in this family. She also had a brother, Robert, and for the most part, it was a very idyllic lifestyle in the 1950s. However, in 1955, Edith came home from grocery shopping, entered their garage, and found Edward hanging from the rafters from a self-inflicted hanging. Said he had given no indication that he was that depressed or suffering any sort of depressive episode. It was a total shock to her. So for the next year, their family was plunged into chaos, as you can imagine. In the 1950s, it wasn't as easy for a single mother to make it. So Edith scraped by doing odd jobs and whatever work she could do to keep the family together. In 1956, early 1956, she met Freddie Kassab. Kassab himself had had his own tragic story. He was of Middle Eastern birth, he had a privileged lifestyle growing up. He had spent most of his life in Europe, had gone to European preparatory schools, and even and traveled the world quite extensively with his parents, who finally came to rest and became Canadian citizens. He was also a Canadian citizen. He joined the Canadian military during World War II. He married a Scottish girl during World War II, and tragedy occurred when they were living in London during the Blitz. If you know what that is, it's where the German Air Force was constantly bombing London to try to drive the people out and kill as many people as possible. His wife and child were killed during the Blitz. So as you can imagine, he had suffered quite a bit of tragedy in his life until he met Edith in 1956 and was immediately taken with her, as well as with her children. Colette, who was a 12-year-old girl at the time of her father's death, instantly fell in love with Freddie Kassab. She told her mother, "I hope you marry him because he's my dad." He's going to be my dad, which is very unusual for a 12-year-old girl. Usually they're quite rebellious, especially if a parent remarries, and the feeling was mutual. Freddie Kassab instantly fell in love with Colette, as well as her mother and brother, and they married in 1956. And they remained in Suffolk County and became pretty much an idealistic family. Colette met Jeffrey MacDonald in high school. They were instant high school sweethearts, but Colette was the typical 1950s good girl, meaning she didn't do things that she knew her parents would be ashamed of. She was a virgin, let's put it mildly. Jeffrey, not so much. He did his fair share of philandering in high school. In fact, rumors say that he had a girl that he dated behind Colette's back, and during the times that they broke up. It was kind of on again, off again. But even during the off again, they remained friends. Jeffrey would show up at the Kassab house and mow the grass without being asked to, without asking for pay. He would ring their doorbell and leave tiny gifts for Colette to be found. I mean, he was just evidently emotionally smitten with Colette, but she would not sleep with him. And so as a result, he had another girl that he was on again, off again with that was purely a sexual relationship. And he was with this girl when he was accepted to Princeton in 1963 after graduating with a 4.0 GPA from their local high school. Here is a picture of Fred and Edith Kassab. This was taken in the 60s, but this is Colette's parents. But he was with his girl, the girl he was sleeping with, while he was attending Princeton. But while he was at Princeton, he, of course, got a look at New England social class and how people at Princeton are considered a cut above most people. It is one of the oldest Ivy League schools in the country, and he determined that the girl he had been sleeping with for years was no longer a good fit for him and where he was going because he had set his sights on becoming a doctor. And he turned his attention back to Colette, who was much more suitable for him in that regard. So they became, once again, a couple. In the meantime, Colette had enrolled in a local Saratoga, New York Skidmore College, which wasn't that far from Princeton in New Jersey, and was wanting to become a teacher. She was a freshman when she and Jeffrey rekindled their relationship, and in 1963, I suppose she decided to get a little bit more into the sexual revolution of the 60s, and they did begin a physical relationship during this time. And in 1963, she discovered she was pregnant with their first child, Kimberly, and the two married. By all accounts, Edith Kassab was thrilled. She loved Jeffrey. She thought there was no one any more perfect for her daughter than Jeffrey MacDonald, and she supported their marriage 100%, even though Colette was pregnant. And remember, this is the 60s, so you still had a lot of conservatism from the 1950s, as well as mixing with the newfound sexual freedom of the 1960s. So it was a bit scandalous, but by all accounts, Freddie and Edith were thrilled that their daughter was marrying Jeffrey MacDonald. He graduated from Princeton in 1964, about the same time that their daughter Kimberly was born, and was accepted to Chicago's Northwestern Medical School, where they moved in 1964, and he graduated with honors from Northwestern Medical School in 1967, about the same time that their second daughter, Kristen, was born. He had accepted a prestigious internship at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital back in New York City, and they moved back there in 1967, where he completed that, which was the first couple. He completed an internship year as well as a first residency year at Columbia Presbyterian. By all accounts, he was training to be a surgeon, a trauma surgeon, which is basically a general surgeon that perform things under duress. So this would be the type of doctor you find in the emergency room, in the field, in the Army, with first responders, that sort of thing. So it was a highly coveted type position that made him wanted by various hospitals, various specialties all around the country. But he settled on the U.S. Army. Remember, this was the era of Vietnam, so nationalism and patriotism were at an all-time high. And what would a good all-American white bread boy do but join the military, which he did in 1969. But he didn't just join the Army. Bearing on his A-type personality, he went one step further and went through basic training and boot camp and joined the 6th Special Forces Division and became a Green Beret as a field surgeon and was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The MacDonald family moved to Fort Bragg, North Carolina in 1969 and moved into post housing. Now, he was promoted immediately to the rank of captain by virtue of being a Green Beret, also from being a doctor, and was stationed to the U.S. military hospital on Fort Bragg. He also moonlighted quite a bit at other hospitals, including Womack Hospital around the Fort Bragg area. Now, Fort Bragg was kind of a hub just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. Um, a lot of people lived there, both military and non-military, and Jeffrey was kind of coveted because of his Army specialty as well as being a Green Beret. They settled into an idealistic middle-class uh, existence, moving to 544 Castle Drive, which was post housing. So they were completely under the realm of the fort and completely on the base. It was a modest 3-bedroom house that was fitting for an officer, though by all accounts, Colette was not overly impressed. She was under the impression that, and was told by Jeffrey, that their house would be furnished, she wouldn't have to do a thing, but when they moved in, the house was in kind of disrepair. There was no furniture, so Colette had to basically decorate it and fix it up herself, much to her dissatisfaction, because she had dropped out of school to become a mom when Kimberly was born in 1964, so she had never achieved her dream of being a teacher and was promised by Jeffrey that once they got to Fort Bragg that she could definitely return to school, that he would help her. But instead of doing that, he started moonlighting at other hospitals, things like that, and so he was never around, and that led to a whole lot of discord within the MacDonald house. But they did make the best of it. But by all accounts, Jeffrey was still a philanderer. He had cheated on Colette numerous times in college, and that continued at Fort Bragg, where he was known to hang around with women and do things with women that his wife would not approve of. But yet, just because she was a housewife, she was completely dependent upon him for income, she kind of kept her mouth shut about the situation. And he did allow her to return to school in 1970, where she started as a sophomore at a nearby college. And that leads us up to February 17th, 1970. Jeffrey returned home in the afternoon about 4 p.m., February 17th, to 544 Castle Drive, Fort Bragg, after working a 24-hour on-call shift at the emergency room. He was tired. He had also started taking amphetamines to keep himself going because of his schedule, not only his military training, but he moonlighting at local hospitals. So he had gotten kind of addicted to speed to keep himself going. At their Fort Bragg residence, he kept a stash of surgical and medical supplies to be non-parallel. Most stuff you probably shouldn't have. So he had a lot of amphetamines. He had a lot of what would now be considered Schedule 1 painkillers. He also had scalpels, bandages, surgical tape, surgical thread. You could basically run a operating room out of the MacDonald house, by all accounts. He returned home after working a 24-hour shift. Colette was in a hurry because she had to get to her class that evening. She was taking a psychology class at the local college that evening. So they had dinner together. She rushed off to get to class. He sat down with Kimberly and watched the TV show Laugh-In, which was, by all accounts, Kimberly's favorite show. And he put the children to bed after the show. He waited up for Colette to get home from her class. The two sat and watched The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, toward the middle of which Colette decided that she was time for her to go to bed, which she did. Jeffrey, by his own words, stayed up reading a crime novel until about 3 in the morning. When he got up, he said to go to bed. He walked down to the master bedroom upon finding Kimberly next to her mother asleep and noticing that Kimberly had wet the bed. He picked Kimberly up, took her back to her bed, put a a blanket down on the wet side of the bed so that Colette wouldn't be disturbed, and he took another blanket and went back to their living room where he said he fell asleep. At 3:42 a.m., a call came into the Fort Bragg Military Police from the MacDonald residence where they were told that people are being killed. They're killing people. There was never any mention of they're killing my wife, they're killing my kids, but he just said they are killing people. The MPs honestly thought they were going to respond to a domestic disturbance, which was not unusual with military families. And so they went to the home. They found the front door locked. They go around to the back door. They found it standing wide open. So they entered through the kitchen and moved through the house. They noticed a coffee table overturned in the MacDonald living room. Didn't think much of it, but they went down and turned to the master bedroom to just to the left as you just enter the hallway. And there they found Colette Stevenson, obviously deceased, in a pool of her own blood with a blue pajama top, a men's blue pajama top draped over her body. Next to her was her husband, Jeffrey MacDonald. He had his arm over her body, and he was lying also in blood, but they couldn't tell right away if it was his blood or his wife's blood. While they worked on Jeffrey, who was obviously still alive, more first responders went down first to Kimberly's room, where they found her dead in her bed of stab wounds and blunt force trauma to the head. They also found Kristen dead in her bed, also of stab wounds. So they therefore called the criminal investigation department of the U.S. Army, who swarmed the house looking for clues and answers. Jeffrey MacDonald was taken immediately to the hospital, where it was discovered that he had what was considered a clean yet minor stab wound between the 7th and 8th rib on his left side, which had partially collapsed his lung. Other than that, he had a few scrapes. He also had a gash over his left temple. The entire time he was asking, "Where's my family? Is my family okay?" The doctors, not knowing quite what to tell him, told him, "Your family is fine. Let's take care of you." So therefore, they patched him up and put him into a room. Meanwhile, back at the house, the investigators were kind of taking a look around and kind of assessing the scene. Kimberly, who had been found in her bed, had a large gash on her right-hand side of her head. She also had bruises behind her ear on the right-hand side. Her left side had been completely caved in. Her eye had sunk back into its socket, and she had a piece of cheekbone protruding from the skin on her left cheek. In addition, she had been stabbed over 18 times by both an ice pick and a knife, and a lot of them obviously rendered post-mortem, meaning she was already dead but had been stabbed after her death. There was blood. Her blood was found on her bed, on the bedroom floor, in the hallway, and in the doorway just outside the master bedroom. Kristen was found with 33 different stab wounds in her bed from a knife, 15 from an ice pick, also many of them post-mortem. Her blood was only found in her bed and the immediate area around her bed, which leads people to believe she was actually killed while lying in bed. Colette, the wife, was probably the most tragic scene. She had been clubbed and stabbed over 21 times. Both her arms were broken, and she had obvious defensive wounds on her arm and her chest. She had a blue pajama top, which was later revealed to belong to Jeffrey MacDonald's, draped over her, that also had very precise knife and ice pick holes in it. Meanwhile, back at the local hospital, Womack Hospital, where Jeff also moonlighted as a ER doctor, he was being questioned by post officials as well, and his account was as follows. He fell asleep after returning Kimberly to her bed after the bedwetting incident and fell asleep on the couch. He awoke, he said, about 3 in the morning to his wife's and oldest daughter's screams. His wife was screaming, "Jeff, Jeff, help me. Why are they doing this to me?" His older daughter, Kimberly, was screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, help me." He said he immediately tried to rise from the couch, but was struck back down by an unknown assailant. He was able to look up, and he said he saw 4 individuals standing over him. 2 white men, a black man with a army sergeant's jackets on, and just in behind them was a blonde-haired woman, what appeared to be a blonde-haired woman with a floppy hat on, holding a candle. Though he said the woman appeared to be in some sort of trance in which she was saying, "Acid is groovy, kill the pig." He said he immediately tried to rise again, but he was punched down, and then he felt what he thought was a punch, because he said he relayed to himself, "Man, this guy can punch," pain to the left side of his torso, which, as I guess turned out, was the puncture wound. He said at that time he ripped his blue pajama shirt over his head, wrapped it around his wrists, and used it to fight off the knife attack at that time. He said at that time he felt blunt force trauma, a pain to his head, and everything went black. He said he awoke later to find everything in the living room turned upside down, he said. He immediately got up and ran down to his bedroom where he found his wife dead on the floor. He attempted, he said, to do CPR. Upon finding that she was already expired, he said that he was in such shock he wanted to cover it up. So he removed a knife that was still stuck in her chest from her chest, which is breaking all sorts of medical protocols, and covered her with his pajama top. He then ran to his children's bedroom. He went into Kristen's room first, finding her also dead in her bed. He then went down to Kimberly's, finding her dead. He said he was in shock at that time, so he stumbled into the kitchen and made the phone call. The Criminal Investigation Unit of the U.S. military wasn't quite buying Jeffrey's story, mainly because of the blood evidence evident at the scene. And from that blood evidence, they were able to point out what they actually thought happened. And I'm going now to turn to a slide where I'll go over all the blood evidence that they found. The MacDonald family was an anomaly in that every member of their family had a different blood type, which is very, very unusual. And it was because of that, this is in the early days of DNA, they didn't really have the sophistication we have where they can pinpoint it down to the cell. So it was the fact that the MacDonald family had different blood types that they could pinpoint whose blood was in what room and what may have happened. And they were able to pin together what they thought happened. First, let's go over Jeffrey MacDonald, who had B-type blood. They found his blood as follows: front and right side of the sink in the hallway bathroom, a step ladder leading to the hallway bathroom, the wicker material in the hallway bathroom, 5 drops of blood in the kitchen floor in front of the kitchen sink, a blood stain near the left elbow on Jeffrey MacDonald's pajama top. They found his blood in the hallway closet door. They also found it on the door jamb in the east bedroom. Colette MacDonald had A-type blood. Her blood was found on the massive stain in the master bedroom carpet, on top of the master bedroom bed, on the blue bedspread and blue sheets that were crumpled in the floor of the master bedroom. They found her blood all over the ceiling of the master bedroom. They found her blood on the wall in the youngest daughter Kristen's bedroom, as well on the bedclothes and bed frame and mattress box springs of Kristen's bed. They found the word pig written in her blood on the headboard of the master bedroom bed. They found her blood in the hallway bathroom on a Hilton bath mat. They found it covering Jeffrey MacDonald's blue pajama top. And they found cast-off splatter along the frames of the walls in the hallway. Kimberly MacDonald, their oldest daughter, who was 5 at the time, had type AB blood. They found her blood on the entrance of the master bedroom, as well as brain serum, brain fluid, in the same area. They found a trail of her blood leading from the master bedroom back to her bedroom. They found her blood on the ceiling of her room, the wall of her room, a transfer stain on the bedclothes of her bed, as well as a pool of blood in her bed. They found a bloody footprint, which was later determined to be Jeffrey MacDonald's left foot, on the carpet in the hallway just outside her room. And her blood was also found on the Hilton bath mat in the hallway bathroom. And they found smudges of her blood on the dining room and kitchen floor. Christy MacDonald, who was 2 at the time, most of her blood was concentrated around her bed, so it was on her mattress and box springs, it was on the bedspread, it was on the sheets. There were a few smudges on the frame, and there was a pool of her blood on the floor where she had literally bled out. And there was a spot of her blood on Jeffrey MacDonald's glasses frame. That blood evidence was vital for 2 reasons. One, it showed the absolute brutality that was used to hurt these people, to kill this young family, and it also showed that Jeffrey's account of the murder couldn't hold water because of what he said. The way he talked, he said that his injuries were concentrated to the living room in a brief fight. Colette was killed fully in the master bedroom, and the girls were killed fully in the master bedroom. In their individual bedrooms, excuse me. So just from the amount of blood that was found all over the house, the investigators were able to piece together what they actually thought happened. And this is what they speculate happened. Jeffrey got up from falling asleep on the couch to go to bed. He went in to the master bedroom, found Kimberly asleep in his bed, and she had also wet his side of the bed. He angrily picked up his daughter, took her back to his bedroom, and came back in, insisting that most likely Colette get up and change the sheets. Colette pushed back and said she didn't feel like it. Could he not just sleep in the living room or put enough blankets down over the side of the bed to cover it? In which case, Jeffrey basically lost his temper and a fight ensued. The fight got more violent, more loud, and eventually led to Colette striking Jeffrey with her hairbrush, which would lead to the small gash found above his left eye. Once he did this, they think he absolutely, between his tiredness, his A-type personality temper, and his use of amphetamines, it all boiled over to what they considered a perfect storm, and he literally snapped. He picked up a piece of wood, a 2x4 that had been used for a home improvement project in the house that week. He picked it up and he began to bludgeon his wife. That would account for the defensive wounds on her hands. And so as he was swinging violently at his wife, Kimberly, the oldest daughter, woke up. She came immediately, of course, to the bedroom door to see what was going on, and they believe mid-swing, when he was swinging to again strike his wife, he swung back with such force that the 2x4 struck Kimberly on the left side of her head, causing a near-fatal head injury. And that's where the blood and the brain fluid from her head, that's the reason it was found on the door frame of the master bedroom. Of course, she immediately hit the floor. By this time, Colette is unconscious on the floor. He believes Colette is dead, so he picks up his now mortally wounded daughter, Kimberly, who was 5 at the time, and took her back to her bedroom. Immediately, they believe that he just decided he had to finish her off because A, at this point, she's going to be a vegetable, and B, he just couldn't leave any witnesses, and he was in such a blind rage that he continued to bludgeon his daughter. He also got an ice pick and a knife and stabbed her repeatedly. Now, about this time, they think he decided he had to finish off the other daughter too because he couldn't have any witnesses, even though the child was only 2 years old. But by this time, they believe Colette had actually woken up from her injuries, and she stumbled out of her room and into her youngest daughter's room because she saw Jeff go in there. They believe that she stumbled to her daughter's bed in a futile attempt to protect her youngest daughter from her husband, and she fell across Kristen to shield her from Jeffrey's rage. At this point, Jeffrey began to stab both of them, and that's the reason that you saw Colette's blood on the wall and ceiling of Kristen's room. After he killed both of them, he wrapped Colette in a blue sheet and blue bedspread from Kristen's room and took her back to the master bedroom and laid her on the floor and then stumbled from there. This is why you found the crumpled, bloody bedclothes in the floor of the master bedroom. He then stumbled into the hallway, and at this point, he had made the left footprint in Kimberly's blood on the hallway from coming out of her room. He stumbled into the hallway bathroom where he took scalpels and other things from his stash of medical supplies and carefully stabbed himself in the left side to collapse his own lung and made some other, what can only be described as minor flesh wounds on himself. He then stumbled to the kitchen, whereas his blood was found in the kitchen, and made the phone call to post police at just after 3 a.m. on February 17th. And guys, I'm sorry, but this is where we have to leave off. I will be back soon with the rest of the investigation as well as the 10-year saga that would follow. I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll be back soon with the rest of this story. Thank you so much. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Ketosis, y'all. Keto Comic. Out.